Safe, reliable, free, and honest support. Qualities you cannot find online. Until now. Introducing the next generation of online technology support. What technology malfunctions are troubling you? Let us know today on the all-new support forums at www.theapplepost.com.
Welcome to GeekCross, the podcast where faith and culture intersect. I'm your host, Jeremy Yoder. In each episode, we look at a topic related to pop culture or geekdom and have conversations that use science fiction, fantasy, movies, gaming, or comic books as a jumping off point to talk about the deeper issues of life. My guest today is Steve Lubitz. Welcome, Steve.
Hi, thanks for having me, Jeremy. I'm glad that we finally got to do this. We've been talking about this for a while, and I'm glad that we finally managed to make it happen. So
we have. Being dads is very busy kind of business, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's especially in the summer when there's not a lot of time to get away from the kids because there's not an early bedtime or an excuse for an early bedtime. So it's a little bit harder during the summer, but we managed to make it happen. So.
We managed to make it happen. Steve, why don't I say a few words about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I am probably best known on the internet for being one of the hosts of a podcast called Isometric on Relay.fm, which is a show about video games that I do with Brianna Wu of Giant Space Cat and Maddie Myers of The Mary Sue and Georgia Dow from iMore. And we talk about gaming both in terms of the business of gaming and the games themselves, but also a lot about the culture of gaming and kind of how it fits into overall culture and how it fits into some other, aspects of the world that we live in. So it's a lot of fun. I mean, all of my co-hosts are incredibly talented and really intelligent women who have a lot to say, and I'm really privileged to be able to talk to them about video games and kind of, we have fun too among the serious things, but it's a great show, and I'm really happy to have been doing it for the past year. So
I've been listening to it since about last summer, right before the GamerGate stuff came down, and so it's been interesting to see how the show has grown, and how what I appreciate about it is when you talk about not just video games, but things that affect people and how technology and how gaming affects people. I really appreciate that part of the show.
Yeah, I mean, it's an important part of it, too, because, I mean, video games, some people still think of video games as child play, but they are art, and there are a lot of things that games have made their way so much into culture now that it really does affect culture at large, and it's important to look at it that way, too. So, among all of the silly stuff that we end up getting into, but it's important to kind of think of them in that broader context too. So we try to do that also.
Cool. So one of the reasons I wanted to have you on was you've made a number of comments and you've written a number of things about your experience as a Jew and gaming and in geek culture. And so I wanted to have a conversation with you about that experience and what it's like to be Jewish and what kind of things do you encounter.
Yeah, so I guess to give a little bit of background, so I was brought up as a conservative Jew in New Jersey. I went to a Jewish day school for 9 years through 8th grade before I went to public high school, and then I ended up going to Brandeis University for college, which is not strictly a Jewish university like there would be like a Catholic university like St. John's or Notre Dame or something like that, but it's a non-sectarian Jewish-sponsored university. So it's the only university in the country, I believe, that has a majority of Jewish students there. So I've been kind of steeped in this my whole life to some extent, and it's very, interesting, both the things that you see when you're really brought up in this culture and also the kinds of things that you find that other people kind of take for granted that you see a little bit differently, because, I kind of joke around that when we start talking about like marginalized groups that, at least for now in the current day and age, that it's like being Jewish is kind of like the least marginalized of the marginalized groups. Like,
sure.
It's like doing a slight, going from like easy mode to normal mode in a video game, right? It's not like going to hard mode, but there are still some things that that you start to see, and they're assumptions that are made when you're growing up in a society that's where, you know, being Christian is kind of the default, where you tend to see yourself not reflected in ways, and then when you do see yourself reflected, it's not always in the way that you would want to see yourself reflected.
Yeah, I can relate to that because, I mean, I also come from an ethnic minority religious group. I mean, we're Christians. Mennonites are Christians, but, you know, we also have an ethnicity historically that's starting to change. And we have a sense of being different from a lot of other Christians. The thing is, I pass off as a white guy. You know, I'm sure you do too. And so that's a kind of a different experience. We have an ability to disappear, to leave our distinctiveness in a way that other people aren't able to.
Yeah, there was a really great post, and I'll have to dig it up, that was posted in the Slack chat that we're both part of a while ago, about like being able to be like white passing as a Jew. And the person in question like posted 2 pictures of himself, one where his hair was very clean shaven, and one where he'd let it grow out, and how he was, you know, received very differently. And it's kind of, I mean, being Jewish is definitely an ethnicity, so there is the stereotypical person who looks like a Jew type of thing, but at the same time, I don't want to use the word pass because that's got a lot of connotation to it, but I can be accepted as white. I can describe myself as white, and it's not questioned or anything like that. Unless somebody really tries to dig into me, or I choose to reveal it to myself, I can go through most of my life and not have anyone know that I'm a Jew if I don't want them to, theoretically. That's not a choice that I choose to make, but that's something that I could, if I wanted to, I could go through life that way for the most part.
You did have an experience a number of months ago, I mean, where you ended up on a white supremacist website, or your picture did, after the plane crash in Germany, correct?
Yeah, that was fun. So a couple of months ago, there was the Germanwings pilot who crashed the plane happens to have the same last name as mine. There's no relation. But what happened was that immediately after that, there were a number of people trying to go into his background, and there was a white supremacist site that was trying to prove that this was a Jewish conspiracy that was revenge for the Holocaust by proving out that this guy was Jewish. So what they did was they went through Twitter and found anybody who had the same last name as him, myself included, and pointed out how they either were, something about their profile was describing them as Jewish, or they happened to have a Jewish look to them or whatever. And so that was kind of part of that whole Jewish conspiracy to get revenge for the Holocaust, which I was not super happy about.
Sure.
And it's kind of shocking because honestly, like, there is anti-Semitism in the world still, but I don't encounter it on a daily basis. So, I mean, there have definitely been times in my life where I've come face to face with it. And when I was in like 4th or 5th grade, there was somebody who drew a swastika on the wall of the synagogue where my school was held, and they brought us all out, and they had us stand in front of it and look at it and say, this is what some people want to do, and you need to confront that there are people like this in the world, and you need to know that there are people who want to hurt us and want harm to come to us, and you need to be aware of that. You don't need to live your life in fear, but you need to be aware that these people are out there. Mm-hmm. And that's a lesson that I've taken to heart, but at the same time, it happens so infrequently that when it does happen, it's really kind of shocking. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's not something that I encounter on a regular basis, but that was kind of a real shocking day when I saw that, and I changed my Twitter avatar pretty much immediately after that, because I just kind of felt yucky about it. It's a great picture that my kid took of me, but I'm not using that on Twitter anymore, unfortunately.
Sure, I understand.
Yeah.
You know, I spent part of my childhood in Germany, in Berlin, and certainly the question of how do you deal with the Holocaust is something that is pretty big in German society. And one of my concerns has been the reemergence of anti-Semitism since the end of the Cold War.
Yeah.
I remember an incident where this would have been in the mid-90s in high school, and we did a field trip to Sachsenhausen, which is a concentration camp just outside of Berlin, in suburban Berlin. And we went out there, and we were walking from the train station to the museum, to the camp, and some skinheads were sitting, looking out of a window, And we had some Nigerians with us. My best friend there was Nigerian, some Nigerian ambassador kids, and they started yelling at us, and they were starting to yell about how we're going to take you to the ovens, and so that was kind of a difficult moment.
Yeah. I've never been to Germany. I know that they've definitely tried to dissociate that part of the history from what Germany is now. It's not gone away necessarily. And I mean, the same people who are, raising the Confederate flag down in the South in the U.S. they have no more love for Jews in general than they do for African Americans. So,
right.
Or any people of color for that matter. So, it's something that I live with. I don't live in fear. I mean, I'm also living in Boston, so though I have seen some Confederate stuff where I live. I mean, I live in central Massachusetts, and it doesn't happen often, but I even see Confederate flags Confederate flags like on pickup trucks and stuff like that out here because I'm in the more conservative part of Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like it's only in the South and it doesn't exist up here either, but it happens a lot less than in other parts of the country where there are fewer Jews or it's less likely that somebody's actually, spoken to a Jew in their life and known that that's happened. So.
Yeah, I mean, my next door neighbor flies a Confederate flag, and
yeah.
I have no idea really how to talk to him about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So even though you've not experienced anti-Semitism on a day-to-day or regular basis, you have sort of run into some of these kinds of issues in the geek world.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of the representation of Jews in a lot of the media is very stereotypical. I mean, it's you see it. Well, Grand Theft Auto is pretty much not a bastion of representation for more or less anybody, but that's up until very recently, that was one of the only video games where you would see any Jewish characters, and that was the Jewish Mafia, which is like a terrible stereotype. I mean, that may have happened at one point, but a lot of the Jews as gangsters or Jews as someone who is greedy and looking to exploit people for money stereotype it's been all the way back since Shakespeare, and that's kind of a tired and an old trope, but that happens a lot, or if it's not something that's that overt, it's something like The Big Bang Theory, mm-hmm. where you have Howard who is you never really see him doing very much as you never really see him doing things that you would expect. I don't even want to say you expect a Jew to be, but you never see him kind of being spiritual or really celebrating that part of his life. But a lot of the, stereotypical, he's got the, the annoying Jewish mother who yells at him from upstairs in the house, and you never actually see her, but she makes brisket all the time. Mm-hmm. And for the first couple of seasons, he's a terribly creepy guy. Yeah. Like the kind of guy who you would just, it's amazing that he got married in the show later on, because he was just completely socially awkward, is being generous to the point where he was kind of someone who would get kicked out of a convention with a code of conduct, probably.
He's kind of like a Woody Allen sort of character.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways.
But Woody Allen was like, I mean, not entirely 50 years ago, but that Woody Allen stereotype is pretty old, and it's still kind of progressing. So it's something that he's the most prominent Jew on a weekly basis lately, and it's frustrating because the Jewish mother stereotype is really overdone. The creepy, socially awkward Jewish guy is kind of overdone, and I mean, I still watch that show. I don't quite hate watch it, but mm-hmm. I do. Mm-hmm. I do watch it still. I don't know why. We've always just been watching it, and so it's something that we just watch. And I guess at the beginning, I kind of liked where they were trying to show some of geek culture in a positive way, and now it's kind of gone beyond that, and geek culture's kind of overtaken everything anyway. So it's not really as edgy as maybe it was back in the beginning. But those are the types of things that you see a lot, and you never really see a good, representation of a Jew, which is really just kind of, a lot of Jews are very secular, at least the way that I observe. I mean, I was raised conservative. I've kind of gone more it's called Reform Judaism. It's more on the liberal end of the spectrum now. But, I think a lot of people feel like if they're going to have a Jewish character in something, that they need to be like performatively Jewish. Like they need to be wearing a yarmulke or a skull cap, or they need to be eating brisket, or they need to have the annoying Jewish mother, or they need to be wearing a Star of David all the time. And a lot of the times, like, my religion is something that is, you know, kind of always with me, but it's not something that I'm outwardly performing most of the time. And it's not something that comes up in conversation a lot.
So you're not constantly doing Fiddler on the Roof and singing tradition or anything like that?
Well, you know, every once in a while.
Once in a while.
I try to keep my show tunes in check, but yeah, that's Fiddler on the Roof. I mean, even then, that was kind of a point in time type of thing. I think that's another one that another movie that a lot of people think of as like how Jews are, and that probably was the case in the period of time where that was set, but that's not the way that most Jews are now. I mean, that's not to say that there aren't very observant Jews who wear black hats and black coats in the summertime and wear what's called tzitzis, which are fringes that come out of the bottom of the shirt.
Mm-hmm.
Or the women will be dressed very modestly, and that don't work on Saturday, and they don't drive on Saturday, so they have to live within a walking distance of the synagogue and keep very strict kosher and keep very strict observance. There are certainly people who do observe like that, but I don't want to say in the minority, but they're not representative of Judaism as a whole. And a lot of Judaism is also represented by Reform Judaism and secular Judaism, where we're just kind of, maybe we go to synagogue on Saturday, maybe we don't, maybe we keep kosher, maybe we don't, maybe we wear a Star of David, maybe we don't, but a lot of times it's just kind of part of who we are, but it's not of how we act around other people a lot of the time.
So in that case, it's more of an ethnic identity than it is a religious faith.
I mean, for some people, it's definitely just part of who they are, but not of what they are, if that makes sense. Like, there are some people who just, being Jewish is how they were raised, and they don't necessarily, they aren't necessarily observant now. And there are some people who are observant, but in a way that fits into their life. I mean, that's definitely how I am. Like, I kept, my parents kept a kosher home. My mom still does keep a kosher home. And the way that I was raised when I was growing up is that I would keep strict kosher in the house, and then we would go out and pretty much anything went in a restaurant. Mm-hmm. So, I'd be waiting an hour between eating milk and meat in the house, and then I'd go out and have, bacon and eggs for breakfast the next day when we went out to IHOP. And that was, and it was kind of a weird thing for a long time. And then eventually, I just decided that I needed, we were trying to keep kosher when my then girlfriend, now wife, moved in, and I moved into our first apartment. And there were a number of reasons that we couldn't do it. One was it was just really difficult for us to be able to keep up with. Another one was that it's really expensive to buy kosher food. And there's basically like one or two stores that were in the area at the time that were 45 minutes away from where we were living. So it's like it was a really drive to have to go out there to get it.
So it wasn't practical at all in order to follow that.
Yeah, it wasn't practical, and it was just, especially when you're first coming out of college, it wasn't something that you could really justify spending like $6 or $7 on a pound of ground beef. Like it's difficult. So I kind of just made the decision among myself that it's something that I wanted to do because it was how I was raised, and it was something that it is important to me to do, just to kind of make that a consideration in my daily life. Like, it's something that I think about whenever I go to eat something like that. I'm going to be keeping to what I've determined to be a version of kosher that works for me, which is basically that I just don't eat animals that are considered not kosher. So I don't eat pork and I don't eat shellfish, basically.
Right.
And so that's just something that I think about, and it's like, well, okay, I'm going to eat this. Is this made of pork? Do I have to look for something else on the menu? Is this meatball have pork in it? Maybe I'll pass on it. Maybe this hot dog. Well, I should probably almost always pass on hot dogs. But but so, it's something that it becomes something that's not overwhelming for me. That's not too hard for me to keep up with, but it's also something that I can kind of keep in the back of my mind as something that is reminding me on a daily basis that, I am a Jew and this is part of who I am. But again, that's not something that's really going to come up a lot unless I'm at like a barbecue restaurant or something like that, where there's like no options. And even at barbecue restaurants, they usually have like brisket or something that I can have. And I just, I don't make a big deal about it.
Sure. I mean, I have similar kinds of experiences, not so much with food, but, I didn't say the Pledge of Allegiance growing up because Mennonites have a strict separation, between church and state. And so, now when you go to baseball games and everybody's supposed to stand up and sing the national anthem and put their hand on their heart, that's one of those moments where, like, I feel like, oh, yeah, there's something different about me from everybody else.
Yeah. And I mean, that's like, it would come up mostly around Christmas time, mostly for me. And Christmas time is very, it's like a month of reminding you that you're different when you're Jewish. It's like the 1 month out of the year where I feel considerably out of place, more so than the rest of the year, because when you don't celebrate something like Christmas, and like even I have, I know a number of people who are, from India who take place in it because they just treat it like a secular holiday, but as being Jewish, it's kind of antithetical to the religion.
Sure.
So it's very hard. It's not something that I can really feel good about celebrating too much. I mean, there are some things like we still have to bring Santa into the house because the town that we're in we're maybe one of 2 Jewish families in the town, and my kids can't keep their mouths shut. So I just don't want to be I don't want to be the family of Jews that ruin Christmas for the 2nd grade. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like we have to kind of dance around Santa, and we still have to do the charade of Santa, even though we know that it's not part of what we believe, and I don't really want to do it, but we kind of have to do it just to keep that drama from happening. So it's one of those really weird conflicts that you end up with. Hopefully we're about the point where we're maybe going to be starting to outgrow it soon, but it's like, well, we're putting out, milk and cookies for Santa. Like, this is weird. I didn't do this growing up, but this is something that we have to do because I didn't go to public school until I was well older, but my kids are in public school, so we have to do that. So it's just one of those little concessions that you don't expect to have to make, but you do because it's, I mean, if I really felt strongly about it, I wouldn't, but it's something that we kind of have to do just to make things easier for ourselves in terms of assimilating and fitting in too.
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, I deal with some of that too because I don't particularly care for Santa. I didn't grow up with Santa.
Yeah.
My parents always like, yeah, we got you the presents. But our kids, they embrace it. I think the oldest one kind of knows it's not real, but plays along with it anyway.
Yeah.
And there's part of me that feels sort of uncomfortable about it because it is kind of this secularization of a Christian holy day, basically. And so I am uncomfortable sometimes with how Christmas is celebrated, but, we also do things to sort of fit in as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of almost from the other direction where it's taken such a mainstream part of culture in that whole month. I mean, it just takes over the entire month, mostly because, retailers want to sell us things.
Right.
It's just kind of taken over the actual meaning of the holiday for you too. I can understand that completely. I mean, that's the same reason that like Hanukkah's gotten so big as it is, because Hanukkah's not even a really major holiday. Mm-hmm. Hanukkah is just there to keep Jewish kids from feeling like they got screwed in the month of December. So it's like, okay, well, you can't do Christmas, but here's this other thing it's like Pepsi to Christmas is Coke, basically.
Yeah.
And then it's not the same thing, but at the same time you can kind of, well, it's 8 days instead of 1, so you get 8 days of presents. And we do up the hell out of that, and just like every day we're gonna light candles and you're gonna get a present because damn it, you're gonna like this holiday whether you like it or not. So
right, yeah. That's great. So as you were growing up and you sort of engaged in culture and in a conservative Jewish home, what spoke to you in culturally? What did you connect with? Was there anybody out there that you, even if they weren't explicitly a Jewish character, that you connected with?
Yeah, I mean, there's just so little that you kind of latch on to anything that you can find. Like, it sucks saying it now, and this is coming. We're recording this right after Pixels came out, so it's, and we just talked about Pixels and ripped the hell out of it on Isometric too. But like, when Adam Sandler's Hanukkah song came out, like that was actually like a huge big deal at the time, and because there really wasn't anything, and it's so stupid.
It is stupid.
Like the song is terrible and it's stupid and it's childish, but at the time to have something to hold on to that everybody else was also excited about, being, in middle, I forget, I was probably like freshman year of high school or something like that when it came out, that everybody else was also excited about, and other people were excited about something that was part of your culture that was just kind of this weird thing that was off to the side, but now people are actually talking about it and celebrating your culture in like the most juvenile way possible. But that was actually a really big deal at the time, and I'm not going around listening to it now, but I remember how I felt at that time, and that was huge. And I mean, Seinfeld was also probably one of the other ones that I latched onto, mainly because, again, he was Jewish in the way that I was Jewish, or the way that I am Jewish, in that he's a Jew, but it's not something that he's constantly making a part of his character about being Jewish.
Right, so he's not screaming, "I'm a Jew" all the time. Basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it comes up, like it came up in the one episode where the dentist was converting to Judaism so he could make jokes about Jews and stuff like that, where it's kind of part of the story, but it comes up when it's appropriate, but it's not always there and always like in your face, like, here I am, I'm Jewish, which is really very close to the way that I, present myself to the world as a Jew too. Like, obviously I'm talking about it to you on a podcast. That's one thing, but it's not something that comes up a lot just because it's something that's part of me, but it's not something that I'm constantly, doing and making it a part of what other people see about me. Mm-hmm. Unless it's something where I'm not working on the high holidays, or I'm, going out and buying all my presents for my kids in like right after Halloween because Thanksgiving and Hanukkah happen to be on the same day that year or something like that. But,
I mean, growing up, I was very similar to that. I didn't wear my Christianity on my sleeve. I went through a time of I was agnostic. Now that I'm a pastor, it kind of comes up all the time,
I mean, it's kind of your job.
It's my job, exactly, yes. Yeah.
So that's a little bit different, but yeah, I mean, there's some things that I had to kind of give up along the way. Like, originally when I started working, I ideally didn't want to be working on Saturday, and like working in IT, I had to give that up pretty quickly because there's no way to get around working on Saturday sometimes in IT. But even then, like, being really observant about the Sabbath is something that never really appealed to me because I could never reconcile the idea of not using electricity and rest as being the same thing. Like, even as a kid, like, so my way of resting is to sit around playing Mega Man all day, and you're telling me that I'm not going to be able to do that, and I'm supposed to enjoy that and find restoration in that? I don't think that's quite how it works for me. So,
right.
The only day of the year as a kid that we completely did that was on Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement, which is the day that the one day that most Jews fast, or I don't even want to say most Jews, that more Jews fast than not, probably. And that was a day that my parents decided that was really a day for, reflection and for concentrating on, the sins that we made throughout the year and how to do better. And so they decided that for that one day a year that we were going to put the lights on timers and shut off all the electricity and just, have a day of quiet and reflection, which I hated at the time. I kind of appreciate that now, even though I don't do it myself, but I do appreciate that they, were willing to do that at the time.
So did you have conflict with your parents in terms of the kinds of entertainment that you enjoyed and pursued and their religious beliefs?
A little bit. There was a period that around when, Fresh DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince came out that I was getting into rap and hip hop like pretty much every white kid of
suburban
that era
kid at the time, right.
Yeah, like the sanitized, very white friendly version of hip hop that our friends who are actually into hip hop are probably rolling their eyes at me right now, even listening to. But
Will Smith is not really hardcore.
No, he's not. He's not representative of the genre in general. But so I did that, and I was starting to get into that, and they're like, "No, you're not going down that road. Like, you're not getting into rap, and that's the one album that you're getting, and that's it." And I don't even know if it was necessarily religious beliefs or just they just didn't want me to. They probably heard a lot of things on the news about, you know, what rap was doing to America's youth and whatever. That was really it, though. But I never really got very deep into anything that would have conflicted with them. I think the closest I got is when I was in middle school. My cousin's wife at the time, she'd passed away a couple years after that from ovarian cancer, but she had worked, before she passed away, she had worked at a record label in A&R. Mm-hmm. And she had found, I was also into grunge because this was 1992 or 1993 and everybody was into grunge. So I was into Pearl Jam a lot, and she had brought me 3 albums. One of them was, I don't remember what one of them was. One of them was Mother Love Bone, which was an album from that Eddie Vedder, or a group that Eddie Vedder was in before Pearl Jam. And one of them was Rage Against the Machine's debut album. Uh-huh. And I was 13, and I put it on, and I listened to the first track, like, okay, this has got a good beat, I could deal with this. And then the second track on that album is Killing in the Name, where he just screams, "F you, I won't do what you tell me," over and over
I know
again.
that song well, yes, yeah.
And I put that on, like, I shouldn't be listening to this. And I turned it off because I was too, you know, quote unquote good as a kid. So I never really got into that. Like, I was never into movies as a kid very much. Like, I think I snuck down and watched Critters once on like cable TV, and I was traumatized for days, which is why I still don't watch horror movies. And so I wasn't really into movies even then. So it was pretty much just video games, and the only conflict we really had was that I wanted them to keep buying me more systems, and they didn't want to spend the money on it. So
right, which is a typical parental problem. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, not in my house, but
not in your house. Well, you know, my eldest daughter is, I think, who's the future, you know, queen of the geeks, is really into video games, and my wife is not thrilled about it. So we have negotiations that we have to do about how much and she can play.
Yeah, we make sure that they're doing their enrichment work and stuff like that too before they start getting into it. But after that, I don't, you know, the way I see it, I figure that I played video games all weekend, every weekend, and I turned out fine. So it's kind of hypocritical for me to necessarily clamp down on them hard, but I just wanted to make sure that they know that this is something you can do when you have all of your other work done for the day. Sure. And all the things that you're supposed to do. But once you have that done, if you get that done early and you want to spend, you know, the next couple of hours playing Fantasy Life, which my daughter's apparently put over 100 hours into.
Wow.
Then, yeah. I don't remember the last time I put 100 hours into a game, but you know, if that's what you want to do, if you can get all your stuff done early enough and you want to have the time to be able to do that, go ahead. But you need to get all your stuff done. But it's not the kind of thing that I have any sort of a moral you know, conflict about, because Lord knows I've spent enough of my time playing video games as a kid that it's hard for me to say, well, it was okay for me to do it, but not for you,
right?
You know, unless it had some sort of real serious, you know, negative impact on my life, which I don't feel like it has. So.
Well, I think for one of the positive things video games has been for my eldest is, you know, she's a very impatient person and wants to do things perfectly the first time, and video games has been a safe place for her to make mistakes and to fail and to practice and to start over. And so that, I think, has been a really positive thing for her to be able to practice at practicing.
Yeah, I actually wrote about that for Pixelkin a few months ago, where we were playing a game called Child of Light. And that was actually something that was important for both of us, not just for her to be able to have a safe place for fail, but also for me to see her doing it and be able to not step in and try to save her. Mm-hmm. And so it was actually a really good lesson for me also, watching her play the game. And you know, it gives you a way that you can kind of help, but it's kind of passive, so you can't just jump in and save the day. And I think that was actually really good for me as a parent too, to be able to have that. So there are a lot of good things, and we try to make it family time too. I mean, there are definitely days where, you know, I'm sitting on my computer playing Hearthstone and they're sitting on their 3DSs playing Animal Crossing or Fantasy Life. But we also try to play Mario Kart together, or play Smash together, or play Splatoon together, and spend that time together instead of us all looking at our individual screens.
Yeah, that can happen so easily. I mean, that you're all in your own worlds. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we try to guard against that some, but you know, it's good to have them. It's good for them to be able to do things on their own too.
Yeah, I think that is good because my oldest will sometimes come up to me, and she's been playing Super Mario Universe, and I think at some point we'll beat it. And she'll come up to me and says, "I need help. I don't know what to do." And I've got no idea what to do, so I make her go back, and she 10 minutes later has figured it out.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. When they're playing by themselves and they come to like, okay, well, like my oldest was playing Mario and Luigi on the 3DS a while ago, and she's like, "I don't know what to do." I'm like, you've gotten farther in this game than I have, kid. Like, I don't know what you want me to do. And then we start trying to find like, walkthroughs on YouTube, and it's like, okay, have you done this? I don't remember. So it's like half an hour later, we figured out maybe what she's supposed to do. So that doesn't work quite as well. But
one of the things that I remember you making comments about was you really liked the last Wolfenstein game, the Wolfenstein, is it New Order? And
Wolfenstein: The New Order.
And the depiction
came out last year.
And the depiction of Judaism, I mean, it kind of touches a bit on the Holocaust, which is an incredibly, I think, a sensitive thing for a video game to be dealing with. But why did you like that game so much?
I mean, I think that... we talked about the kinds of characters that typically end up in media, and what kind of struck me is the just a little bit of background on the game. What it takes place in 1960 in an alternate universe where the Nazis won the war. So the BJ Blazkowicz, who's the main character from every Wolfenstein game going back to Wolfenstein 3D, he wakes up in an asylum, and the Germans are about to shut it down and kill him, and then he ends up escaping with one of the nurses, and then they decide to join the resistance and try to take down the Nazis and get revenge for one of his comrades who was killed before he was put into a coma and stuff like that. So about halfway through the game, they discover that there's this flaw in the concrete that the Nazis are using to build up these giant cities that have sprung up almost overnight since the end of the war. And that they need this gentleman named Set Roth, who was an engineer, to help figure out what that flaw is and then be able to take advantage of it. But he is in a concentration camp in Croatia, so the plan is for Blazkowicz to go in, infiltrate the concentration camp, and then bust him out. Mm-hmm. And the way that he infiltrates the concentration camp is by being taken prisoner and admitted to the concentration camp as a prisoner.
Right.
Which I'm looking at this and I'm like, Wolfenstein games are not known for their sensitive treatment of subject matter.
Right.
And I'm playing this and I'm like, I'm very nervous about this. I don't know how this is going to go. And the one thing that Wolfenstein really does very well is it does a very good job of making the main character and the player feel helpless at times when it's appropriate, which is different than a lot of first-person shooters where you're just kind of running and gunning the whole way, and it's meant as purely as a power fantasy. And there's definitely some of that in this game. But part of what they do at certain points in the game is that they take most of your power away and then make you experience a sequence without the benefit of a huge Gatling gun on your shoulder. So they have him go into the concentration camp. You have to put your arm in a machine that tattoos something on his a number on his forearm, and they have him go through, the living quarters and the work part of the work camp before he actually gets to Set Roth. And Set Roth is a very tough guy, which is not a way that you typically see Jews portrayed. Is not as a tough, strong character. Even though he's a prisoner, he's still a very tough and very strong character. I mean, you get used to the caricature of the neurotic Jew. Like, again, even like Jerry Seinfeld is like the neurotic character is how you expect to see him. And Set Roth is not neurotic. He knows exactly what he wants to do. He has a plan, and he gets Blazkowicz to execute that plan. And it went down to the fact that he uses phrases in Hebrew and in Yiddish that I have never heard in a video game. Like, I've never heard someone say Yasher Koach in a video game, which is the phrase that you say to someone in synagogue after they've completed a part of the service or completed or received an honor as part of the service. Like that, it's like a congratulations type of thing. And it's something that I've never heard in a video game. Like, I very rarely hear Hebrew, even in culture in general, outside of something like Fiddler on the Roof. Or Yiddish. You very rarely hear it. And the other thing is that he was pronouncing things in an Ashkenazi accent that is something that's not taught now. It's something that I've heard growing up in synagogue around some people who were, older members of the congregation, even my parents or my dad really to some extent, that they pronounce certain characters of the Hebrew alphabet as an S sound instead of a T sound. Mm-hmm. And that's something that would have been very appropriate for someone who was growing up in Eastern Europe or was raised in Eastern Europe, but not something that if somebody just went and, listened to Hebrew on the internet or even went through like people speaking Israeli Hebrew that they would pick up. So it was kind of an attention to detail that I was very impressed by. I mean, I've since been reading some things about the way that the game played out that some people seem to think that it implies confirming a Jewish conspiracy, because the way that it ends up is that the way that the Nazis got all of this technology is that there was a Jewish mystical society called Dat Yichud that had access to technology that was beyond the reach of the rest of humanity at the time, and the Nazis took hold of that, and that's what they were using to win the war. And so I on the one hand, I can see that. I mean, one of the things that fuels a lot of anti-Semitism, the thing that fueled, that blog post pulling my Twitter avatar, is the idea that there is a giant Jewish conspiracy. But I think there's a difference also between like a mystical society that's a subset of Judaism. I mean, even like something along the lines of like Kabbalism, which is the thing that Madonna made popular for a little while when she got into it for like 15 minutes. That the kind of there's always been kind of mystical small groups within Judaism that I could believe that and separate that from there being like a giant Jewish conspiracy. But I could see how some people would have that criticism of it. I didn't take it that way.
Sure. Well, also right now, the big hot thing with the Nazis is the mystical stuff, the elements of it, and the weird technology and the conspiracy theories about Nazi UFOs and secret bases in Antarctica, and that Hitler was trying to find the Holy Grail. I mean, that's sort of part right now of the mythos of the Nazis that's kind of out in front.
Yeah. And so, I mean, you even go back to like Raiders of the Lost Ark or whatever, and that kind of thing too. And so that's the kind of thing that I definitely saw some people asking about that, and it didn't really hit that for me. It actually almost made me feel better about it, just because there was the belief that a Jewish group could produce that technology and kind of using, I almost saw it as a positive in some way, that it portrayed the Jews as a strong group, which is not the way that Judaism is typically portrayed, even though there is some element of that, Jewish conspiracy piece to it. But I didn't really take it as a negative as much as some people, I think, would expect me to take it as.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
I understand.
Yeah.
Do you think that there is an anti-Semitism problem in gaming?
I don't know that there is necessarily. I think that there's definitely a problem of stereotyping in the way that there is with every other marginalized group. I don't know that I would go so far as to call it anti-Semitism. There was an article about that I came across the other day about Jewish erasure in the new X-Men movies,
right,
where they were going through a number of characters, including, well, Magneto's Jewish heritage is pretty clearly laid out in X-Men First Class, where they allude to it in the earlier movies. And by the way, in case you're a fan of Isometric and you are thinking Steve hates movies, why is he talking about movies? I have actually seen most of the X-Men movies, and I actually do like the X-Men, so I have my exceptions.
We'll put that on the record. Yes.
But they do go through a lot of Magneto's past, growing up in a concentration camp, and then how that ends up fueling how he becomes an antagonist of humanity later on, when basically both the Russians and the U.S., who are about to go to war themselves, figure out the mutants are the problem and decide to turn all their guns on the small group of mutants that are all kind of neatly contained on one beach. Sorry if I'm spoiling First Class for you.
Oh no, I've already seen it. You're fine.
Well, more for your listeners.
Oh, my listeners. Yes, well, we don't care about that.
Yeah, sorry, I should have put a spoiler horn in there, but
I don't have a horn, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah, you should get one.
I should get one.
Those
yeah.
are helpful. Yeah. But so then they're going on about how Kitty Pryde, who's Shadowcat, how she is not portrayed as Jewish in the movie. I have not seen Days of Future Past. It's on my list of movies to watch. But from what I was reading in the article, that they didn't, because she had been known to wear a Jewish star around her neck in some of the comics, that she should have been in the movie, which again is something that maybe she would and maybe she wouldn't, but that's not necessarily erasure, and that her religion in the comics is very important to her, but it never comes up in the movie. And it's like, well, it's a 2-hour movie.
Right.
It's not, we don't have, 15, 20, 30 years of comics to tease that stuff out. There's a 2-hour movie, and it's probably not relevant to whatever is moving the story along.
Yeah.
So the fact that she's in the movie at all, and I know that she's Jewish because I've read enough comics and I know how few Jewish characters there are in the comics, it's okay. I mean, it's the same thing. Like, if they don't go into the fact that Ben Grimm is going to synagogue on Rosh Hashanah in the new Fantastic Four movie that comes out in a couple weeks, I'm okay with that too, because I know that he's a Jew and I don't need them to go out of their way to make those characters performatively Jewish. I mean, if they make a reference to it, that's great. That's a bonus. Mm-hmm. But I don't necessarily consider it erasure to have them not be performatively Jewish when that is actually very close to my experience, that I don't necessarily know that I would be performatively Jewish in that kind of a situation either. So
right.
that, that doesn't necessarily offend me, as I seem like it offended the writer of the article, who, from what I could tell, is also not Jewish. So, it was trying to, kind of look out for in a general diversity point of view. And I appreciate that. But at the same time, it kind of didn't ring true to me that felt like erasure to me. I mean, there are some things around the Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch being part Romani that did get erased that you could probably make a stronger case about.
Yeah.
But they were also making a case that they were erasing their Judaism because they were Magneto's kids, but they never knew their father and were raised by an adopted family. So if they did come to their Judaism, they probably came to that much later. It wouldn't necessarily have been part of who they were raised and how they saw themselves either.
Were you aware that Marvel actually did a miniseries back in, I think, 2008 about Magneto's experience in the Holocaust as a kid?
I wasn't. I was much more into comics in like the 90s. Mm-hmm. Than I have been lately. It just got to the point where once I got into college, it just got too expensive to keep up with. And I've tried some things like Marvel Unlimited, and I may go back to Marvel Unlimited. It's hard without an iPad that the kids haven't taken over.
Yeah, I know that. I run into that too. Yes.
But that's the kind of thing I would like to get back into a little bit. But I haven't kept up with it as much since probably the end of the 90s. So no, I haven't. I would like to take a look at that.
Yeah, it's called X-Men. It's called X-Men Magneto Testament.
Okay, I'll check that out because that sounds like something that would be relevant to my interest.
Yeah, I think it would be.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to be an adult and be a geek, and all of a sudden, dealing with limited time resources, especially, and all the other obligations you have, and to continue to indulge in your hobby and the things that you love, it gets harder.
Yeah, it does. And I've tried Marvel Unlimited, and it was like I went through like the whole Guardians of the Galaxy reboot or most recent miniseries, because I was, that's another movie that I've watched is Guardians of the Galaxy. I'll just enumerate all the I could probably enumerate all the movies that I've watched in the rest of the show, but so I read through that, and I read through a beginning of the Captain Marvel run, but then I just started running out of time, and I realized I wasn't spending enough time to justify paying for another monthly fee for it. But it's the kind of thing I could probably pick up and put down, as I needed to. But it used to be a cost of money, and now it's just a cost of time.
Sure.
To not have that time to be able to keep up with it. And comics are even more difficult to, be fluent in than video games, because comics are so convoluted if you're not, in the day-to-day of them, to be able to even just to figure out how to get enough context to be able to understand what you're reading sometimes.
Right, because they have all kinds of different timelines and yeah. Can I ask you one more thing? Can I ask you a GamerGate question in the Judaism part? Is that okay?
Sure. Sure. Yeah, that's. I'm waiting with bated breath. Go ahead.
So when GamerGate kind of busted out, and you've been sort of close to it, some of the anti-Semitism stuff seemed to come back up. Anita Sarkeesian, who's not Jewish, was depicted in a manner with that sort of stereotype. The game Hatred, there's been some accusations that the development team has connections with Polish nationalist anti-Semitic groups. So it does seem to be there, or the entire PC Master Race thing.
Oh yeah, that's another thing, the PC Master Race thing, where where you have no problem with associating yourself with a term that the Nazis used because you want your games to run at 60 frames per second or else. Yeah, that's not one of gaming's most shining moments right now, for sure.
So do you think that's anti-Semitism, or do you think people are kind of ignorant and they don't know what they're talking about?
A little from column A, a little from column B. I think that there are some people who legitimately don't know where it comes from, and I think that more of them know where it comes from, and they think that everybody else just needs to stop being so soft and just deal with it. I think that there are some people who are the overlap of the people who are typically very still in Gamergate, like at this point, like almost a year later. There's a pretty big overlap between them and a lot of the hate groups. I mean, Gamergate itself is a hate group. It's been labeled that, and there have been some studies that have gone and looked at like the Gamergate subreddit and compared it to some of the horrible subreddits that have been in the news as ones that should be shut down, and the Venn diagram is basically concentric circles.
So some of the same kind of actors are in both areas. Same behaviors.
Yeah, and I mean, it follows, right? Because, I mean, the same people who are going to hate women are probably going to hate people of color, who are probably going to hate Jews because they are feeling like their spaces are getting taken away from them, and they're going to react to that harshly. So I think that anyone who doesn't fit into what they consider themselves to be, I think that there's like a lot of truth in like the PC Master Race thing. I don't think it's an accident. I mean, it was coined by a video blogger at the Escapist a few years ago as a joke, and at the time he was actually making fun of those people, and they've kind of adopted it. But I think there's definitely a nugget of truth there that this is a group of people who have no problem with appropriating a Nazi term and then taking it as a badge of pride. Mm-hmm. So I think that there's something there. I was definitely very nervous, especially at the beginning, about Gamergate coming after me for some of the same reasons that they would come after Brianna or anyone else. I mean, I'm close enough to it that I've taken precautions for myself. There's something to be said for me being a white dude and being able to present it as a white dude that kind of insulated myself from that a little bit. But it's also always been in the back of my mind that these are people who would come after me for being Jewish as much as they would come after Brie for being a woman, or come after like Tariq Musa for being a person of color, or anyone else who they decide is not on their list of approved people right now. So I think there's definitely an aspect of anti-Semitism there as much as there is an aspect of sexism and racism and everything else. I mean, they throw around swastikas just as easily as they throw around Confederate flags. Yeah. As easily as they throw around that caricature of Anita that they were sending around a few months ago. So I think that it's just, these are people who are going to hate anybody who they feel like is encroaching on their space, and that's something that they're going to do, unfortunately.
I mean, I interviewed Aline Sims last night. We're talking about some of this in a broader sense. And it does seem, right now with Donald Trump, who is, number one in the polls for the Republican primaries and saying horrible things about Hispanics and immigrants, there seems to be this moment where all this nastiness is coming together at one moment.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely some part of conservatism also is, a fear that things are being taken away, and a fight back against that. And I'm not saying that everyone who identifies as Republican feels that way, because it's not the case. No. But there's definitely a contingent, and it feels like if it's not a growing in quantity, it's growing in volume of people who feel like they are losing something, and that it's not just being lost because things are getting better for everybody. It's being lost because people are coming in and taking that away from them. And I mean, that's it. Having been in a Jewish day school for 9 years, having gone through a several month program every single year of Holocaust studies, and I mean, that was something that we studied a lot, and that they drilled into us a lot, is that just because we are part of society right now, doesn't mean that can't change. I mean, that's right now. I keep in the back of my mind that I, as a Jew, am accepted as white and accepted into white culture because that is the current climate in this country at this point in time. And that was the case for, Jews in Germany in the 20s and 30s too, or the early 30s.
The Jews had been in Germany since the Middle Ages.
Right. And part of, German society. I mean, you had Jews in Russia too, but they were predominantly, confined to shtetls, and they would just kind of hunker down every time that the Russians decided to run through with a pogrom, and lived with that hanging over their heads. But the Jews in Germany, for the most part, were, and even in some of the other countries, like in Scandinavia and in Poland, like these were people who were owning businesses, and they were part of German society until the Nazis came to power, and they decided that was no longer the case, and they were the ones who were responsible for everything, and they needed to be rounded up. So it's something that's always in the back of my mind, that I am considered white right now because the rest of white society accepts that is the case right now. And that has been pretty much since the Holocaust, more out of guilt about how the rest of the country, or how the rest of the world treated Judaism and Jews in Europe while the Holocaust was going on. But that can change very quickly. And so that's something that, I don't like to think about, but it's something that's a reality.
Right.
And, and a lot of what I've seen coming out of GamerGate has definitely reflected that there's definitely still a sentiment of anti-Semitism there that I don't like to think about, but it's still there, and I need to be guarded from it, sure. Unfortunately.
So in the midst of all this, to end on a positive note, where do you see hope? Where do you see goodness in the midst of all that?
I mean, I feel like things are getting better. You know what I mean? Like E3 at this year's, had a lot of progress in terms of, of female protagonists in games, which was a huge step forward, where that wasn't really the case before. And a lot of value of that, or even, thinking along those lines. I mean, there's still a lot of work to do. And like, I don't expect to see a lot of Jewish representation in games, and I'm okay with that. Every time that I talk about this, I have to remind myself that I'm still a straight white dude. I can go play Mega Man if I want to see myself be represented. Right. But at the same time, I think there's a lot more appreciation for diversity. There's a lot more. It's not something that people feel like they have to do. It feels like something that it feels like it's starting to change from something that people who are creating media feel like they have to do to something that they are starting to want to do. And I feel like, despite all of the noise that's coming out in opposition to that, I feel like that's still something that's happening, and it does feel like slowly things are getting better. I mean, the old adage is change happens slowly, then all at once. And I feel like we're still on the slowly part, but I feel like things, even though it seems horrible right now, and it has seemed horrible for a while, it's kind of the storm before the calm almost. I'm hoping. That's where I find hope, at least. And I feel like, talking about this stuff is important. And the more that people are willing to come out and talk about it and say things like, this may not be who I am, but I want, everyone else to be represented, and I want other people to be able to see themselves in video games or in movies or in any sort of media the way that I have. And be able to use that power. I think that's starting to change, and that's where I would find hope there.
That's actually really encouraging.
Yeah.
So, Steve, where can people find you out there on the internet?
Well, you can find me making dad jokes and yelling at clouds on Twitter at I'm at Wicked Good there. You can find my podcast Isometric at relay.fm/isometric or at isometricshow.com. And my personal site on the internet where I have most of my writing and links to the stuff that I've written elsewhere and links to all the other podcasts that I've been on and stuff like that is at multiball.net. So I've written about a couple things that we've talked about, and you can go read up on those also, and if you are more interested in more along those lines.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Steve. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. This was great, and I'm really happy we were able to do this.
All right, good. If you like GeekCross, you can help us out and leave us a review on iTunes. You can get a hold of us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @GeekCrossShow. You can email us at @geekcrossshow@gmail.com. I'm going to throw up some show notes at jeremyyoder.net. GeekCross is a McLaren production. I'm Jeremy Yoder. Thanks for listening.